he was denied the Nobel Prize. Yet he permanently altered the course of world literature. He spent much of his life in physical darkness, and still his ideas illuminated the minds of millions. With only a handful of pages, he challenged time, identity, reality, and even the idea of God itself. Loved by many, rejected by others, and above all, profoundly misunderstood. Today, the shadow of Jorge Luis Borges is larger than his own body of work. This is not merely a documentary about a writer. It is the story of a man who dared to write infinity and who inevitably became part of it. But to understand Borges, we must first lose ourselves in his labyrinths. On August 24th, 1899, in an old house in the Palermo district of Buenos Aires, a child was born who would spend far more time inside words than in the streets of his city. His name was Jorge Francisco Isidoro Luis Borges, and long before he became aware of it, his destiny had already been written. That house was not simply a home, it was a living library. Books were cultivated there, as others cultivate vineyards. His grandmother spoke English fluently. His father, an educated anarchist with frustrated literary ambitions, owned a private library larger than many schools of the time. From an early age, Borges was not treated like a child. He was treated like a reader in training. He read his first complete book unusually early, an adapted version of Don Quixote. At 6, he told his mother he wanted to become a writer. At 7, he wrote his first short story, inspired by Cervantes and Shakespeare. His father did not discourage these dreams. He refined them. English came before Spanish. Books before playgrounds. Paradox before certainty. G. Wells. Edgar Allan Poe. G. K. Chesterton. The idea that everything could be a metaphor. From the beginning, Borges lived under an inverted prophecy. He was not destined to be a man of the world, but a man of worlds others barely suspected existed. And yet, his childhood was not happy. His speech, filled with Anglicisms, isolated him. His extreme shyness made him invisible to other children. In his memory, patios, dark libraries, and the quiet hum of language formed a universe more real than any schoolyard. In 1914, his father took the family to Europe, ostensibly to consult doctors about his worsening blindness. What appeared to be a pause became a rupture. Borges was 15. Geneva was not simply a Swiss city. It was a gateway to modern Europe, to philosophy, and to ideas that would shape his mind forever. While the world collapsed into the First World War, Borges studied Latin, French, and German. He devoured Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. He learned to think of reality as a fiction, one endlessly rewritten. In Geneva, he did not seek refuge. He found expansion. But something else was growing in silence. Blindness. Inherited. Inevitable. Advancing without warning. Even as an adolescent, Borges understood something others never would, that reality could be arbitrary, fragile, and constructed. The myth was forming, not through conquest or power, but through books, mirrors, and language. After the war, the Borges family traveled through Spain. There, Borges encountered another fire, literary avant-garde. In Madrid, he joined the ultraists, writers determined to break with modernism and reinvent poetic language. Borges felt instantly aligned. At 19, he was no longer merely gifted. He had a voice. But the shadow followed him. His father Set's blindness was no longer a warning. It was a sentence. In 1921, after 7 years abroad, Borges returned to Buenos Aires. But he returned as a stranger. The city he left behind had become his raw material. Its streets, patios, and outskirts transformed into symbols. Buenos Aires became myth. He would walk Palermo as one navigates an ocean, turning corners into archetypes, neighborhoods into metaphysical maps. While Argentina struggled with politics and unrest, Borges built a parallel universe, one where knife fighters were epic heroes, suburbs were battlegrounds, and time dissolved into language. He published essays, poetry, and manifestos, and later rejected many of them. His mind was a mirror that never reflected the same image twice. Then came 1938. A minor accident, a head injury, an infection. Borges nearly died. And while hovering between delirium and recovery, he wrote a strange story. A man rewrites Don Quixote, word for word, not by copying it, but by becoming its author in another time. That story marked the birth of the Borges the world would come to know. Not a storyteller, an architect of impossibility. From that moment on, Borges abandoned poetry as a center and embraced the short story as a philosophical weapon. Between 1939 and 1944, he created works that permanently altered literature. Infinite libraries, books that contain all books, worlds invented so completely they begin to replace reality. A single point that holds the entire universe. Borges did not write fiction. He built mental traps, and the reader was always inside them. But as his work ascended, his body declined. Blindness arrived slowly, and then completely. By 1955, Borges could no longer see. For most, this would have been an ending. For Borges, it was a transformation. He dictated his work. He wrote without paper. He remembered entire books. His mind became his library. That same year, he was appointed director of Argentina's National Library, a man responsible for 1 million books he could no longer read. "I always imagined paradise as a library," he once said. Now he lived there, in darkness. International recognition followed. Lectures across Europe and the Americas. Universities listened. Writers followed. Yet the Nobel Prize never came. Politics intervened. A photograph, a handshake with a dictator. The Academy turned away. Borges claimed indifference. but the wound remained. Still, his work required no validation. His later writings became leaner, more precise, more devastating. He no longer dazzled. He named things, and by naming them, created them. In his final years, Borges traveled constantly, blind, fragile, guided by others. Eventually, he chose exile, not from a country, but from noise. He returned to Geneva, to the city where his mind first awakened. On June 14th, 1986, Jorge Luis Borges died quietly at 86. No spectacle, no public agony. He was buried in Geneva beneath a modest stone inscribed with ancient words. His death did not close a chapter. It multiplied it. Borges became something rare, not merely a writer, but a category. His influence spread beyond literature into philosophy, physics, digital theory, artificial intelligence. He anticipated hypertext without computers, infinite data before the internet. Borges did not belong to the 20th century. He belonged to all centuries, and perhaps to none. Because Borges understood something terrifying and beautiful, that the self is an illusion. A time is circular. That reality is a text written by no one and read by all. As long as someone reads him for the first time, Borges has not died and never will.